Welcome to The Explainer. So glad you're here. Today, we're literally zooming out as far as possible to answer a massive question. How do we actually fit into the grand cosmic scheme of things? To really understand our place in the universe, you've got to understand our origins. We're going to start with the vast ancient cosmos and zoom all the way down, and I mean all the way down, to the very first microscopic cell. So, let's just dive right in and explore the origin of life itself.
Let's kick things off with a bit of a mind bender. When you look up at the stars on a clear night, did you know you're actually peeping into the past? Seriously, it's true. Because stellar distances are just, well, they're so unimaginably huge that we measure them in light years. That means the starlight hitting your eyes right this very second, it actually started its journey millions of years ago from trillions of kilometers away. When we look at stuff right around us, we see it instantly in the present. But looking at the stars, that's literally time travel.
And that crazy scale is exactly what sets up our topic today. There's a line in the source material that puts this so perfectly. What follows is the longest of all the construed and conjectured stories. I just love that phrasing. We're covering a truly unique event here. This isn't just a story of biodiversity on our planet. No, it's the story of life set against this massive, overwhelming backdrop of the evolution of the Earth, and honestly, the evolution of the universe itself.
So to make sense of all this, we rely on evolutionary biology, which is the study of the history of life forms on Earth. But here's the catch. To truly wrap our heads around the breathtaking changes in flora and fauna over millions of years, we actually have to understand the stage they live on first. We really need to grasp the origin of the Earth and the stars. All right, let's start at the very beginning. 13.8 billion years. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the almost unimaginable age of our universe. It's incredibly vast, made up of these huge clusters of galaxies, containing billions of stars, plus massive clouds of gas and dust. Fun fact, every atom in our bodies was forged somewhere out there. But relatively speaking, against that massive cosmic expanse, the Earth, it's basically just a speck.
So how did all that vastness actually come to be? Well, the Big Bang Theory attempts to explain this origin to us. It all started with a singular, massive explosion. And we're talking an explosion so big, it's literally unimaginable in physical terms. As the universe expanded, the temperature finally dropped and it cooled. Sometime later, elemental gases like hydrogen and helium formed. Eventually, these gases condensed under gravitation, forming the magnificent galaxies of the universe we see today.
Now, if we zoom in from the wider universe down to our own Milky Way, a pretty clear timeline emerges. We start 13.8 billion years ago with the universe forming, then fast forward quite a bit to our solar system, where Earth was supposed to have formed about 4.5 billion years back. And then we hit an absolutely crucial milestone. Life appeared roughly 500 million years after the Earth formed. So that puts the origin of life at almost exactly 4.0 billion years ago.
But, early Earth wasn't the welcoming, beautiful blue marble we know today. Actually, it didn't even have an atmosphere at first. The surface was completely covered by this searing, hostile, molten mass. Eventually, very specific gases started releasing from this molten surface. We're talking about water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, and ammonia, all just escaping into the void above.
So how in the world do we get from toxic, molten rock to life-giving oceans? It's actually a really fascinating, active chemical choreography. First up, harsh UV rays from the sun aggressively broke up the water vapor into hydrogen and oxygen. The lighter hydrogen gas simply escaped right into space. Then, that leftover oxygen combined with the ammonia and methane. And this incredible reaction led to the formation of more water, CO2, and, crucially, the protective ozone layer. Finally, as the Earth cooled down, all that water vapor fell as relentless rain, filling up huge depressions on the surface to form our very first oceans. It's kind of like a giant planetary cooling system.
Okay, so we've got oceans, but where did life actually come from? Let's go full Mythbusters here and look at what early thinkers believed, because there were two major competing theories. On one side, you have panspermia. This was favored by early Greek thinkers, and it's the idea that life literally came from outer space in the form of units called spores. And honestly, believe it or not, this is still a favorite idea for some astronomers even today. On the flip side, we had spontaneous generation. This was the somewhat messy belief that life just sprang directly out of decaying and rotting matter, like straw and mud.
But then, enter Louis Pasteur. Through some really careful experimentation, he definitively debunked spontaneous generation. He boldly demonstrated that life comes only from pre-existing life. What he did was he placed killed yeast in pre-sterilized flasks and showed that absolutely no new life arose, zero. But in another flask that he left open to the air, new living organisms did arise from that killed yeast. So with that, spontaneous generation was dismissed once and for all. But wait, if life didn't just spontaneously generate from mud, how did the very first life form actually originate on Earth?
Section 1. Chemical Evolution. The recipe for early life. To answer that huge origin mystery,
Oparin of Russia and Haldane of England proposed a really groundbreaking hypothesis. They suggested that the first form of life could have come from pre-existing non-living organic molecules, things like RNA and protein. This means that the formation of life was actually preceded by chemical evolution. But it needed a very specific, totally chaotic recipe: scorching high temperatures, violent volcanic storms, and crucially, a reducing atmosphere containing methane and ammonia.
Now, obviously, a hypothesis is just an idea until you actually test it. Enter L.Miller, an American scientist in 1953. He actually managed to recreate these volatile early Earth conditions right on a laboratory scale. He used a closed flask with an electric discharge to simulate fierce lightning strikes, set it to a blistering 800 degrees Celsius, and threw in a mix of methane, hydrogen, ammonia, and water vapor. The result? He actually observed the formation of amino acids. It was a total eureka moment. And following his lead, other scientists ran similar experiments and observed the formation of sugars, nitrogen bases, pigments, and fats. A real game changer.
But here's the coolest part. We weren't just creating this stuff in a lab. The universe was doing it out there too. Meteorites falling to Earth actually contain these exact same compounds. Analysis of meteorite content revealed similar organic molecules, which profoundly indicates that these exact same chemical processes are happening right now elsewhere in space. With this limited but absolutely powerful evidence, the first part of this conjectured story, chemical evolution, was more or less accepted by the scientific community.
Let's map out how this timeline ultimately resolves. 4 billion years ago, Earth's early oceans existed. Then, roughly 3 billion years back, we get the first non-cellular forms of life. Now, we don't know exactly how the first self-replicating metabolic capsules arose, but they would have been giant molecules, like RNA, proteins, and polysaccharides, that somehow managed to reproduce their own molecules. And then comes the huge evolutionary leap. About 2 billion years ago, or 2,000 million years ago, we see the definitive arrival of the first cellular forms of life. These were likely single cells, which is a massive biological upgrade from those non-cellular molecules, and all of these early cellular life forms lived entirely in a water environment. So this version of biogenesis, where life arose slowly through evolutionary forces from non-living molecules, is what's widely accepted today.
Which brings us to the edge of an even bigger mystery. We've got single cells in the water. But I mean, look out your window. How did we get here? Once formed, how could these simple first cellular forms of life slowly evolve into the massive, breathtakingly complex biodiversity we see today? Well, that is the fascinating story of biological evolution, and it's exactly the thought-provoking question I want to leave you pondering. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer today. Keep looking at the stars, keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.